Yeah, about 25 k's west of Bairnsdale, near the Munro Stockdale area of east and central sort of Gippsland. What you're looking at here is it was a bluegum plantation a couple of years ago that's been converted. This is the one in the foreground. It's been converted now into pine. Across around here, the foreground shot, that was also bluegum. The one in the background was pine. And we just scroll around here, and you're looking at in front of me is the next bluegum plantation. That's you can see a couple of the bluegums that have actually survived in there. There's another one in there, but yeah, essentially bluegum converted over into pine. So why this is significant is because these areas that are now pine were initially planted to feed hardwood into the Maryvale pulp mill down near Traralgon and Morwell. Now it's a bit complex, so bear with me, but I've got some little graphs here. So under the scenario in 1996, there was a wood pulp agreement signed which guaranteed the pulp mill, Australia's biggest pulp mill, a legislated yield of hardwood. So anyway, that was guaranteed in the mid-90s. I think Jeff Kennett signed that. There was renewal of a thing that had been established in the 60s. But anyway, so by 2004, the Maryvale pulp mill was largely reliant on 350,000 cubic metres of hardwood from native forests, which is the dark green. And around that same time, the plantations from Hancock, the big plantation grower in the Stresleckis in central Gippsland, was around about 300, could have been 250, 300 cubic metres, which was feeding all the hardwood requirements into the Maryvale pulp mill. Now what people seem to have forgotten about or don't really realise is that in 2005 there was an expansion at Maryvale, and a new pulp mill was constructed. Now to feed that new pulp mill, the mill required an extra 200,000 cubic metres a year of hardwood from native forests. And they actually applied, and they were successful in getting that expansion of the requirement for hardwood from the state government, and the feds also signed off on it as well. So you went from 350,000 cubic metres of native forest entering Maryvale to a state of 550,000, with Hancock still guaranteeing, about 250, 300,000 of hardwood as well. Now, under the expansion plans, the Australian paper said that they would plant 20,000 hectares of bluegum to meet that 200,000 increase. And so in about 10 to 12 years, that bluegum was supposed to be ready to be logged, and I think they had to plant about 20,000 hectares of the bluegum. So, like I said to you before, this is some of the area in front of us that was bluegum. It's been logged once, and it's not bluegum anymore. So that was the state. So what was promised under the pulp mill expansion, and in an ideal situation by 2016 this should have eventuated, they would have still been guaranteed their 350,000 cubic metres of hardwood from native forests under the Wood Pulp Agreement Act. They would have still been given the amount from Hancock if Hancock's plantations were growing up to speed. About 35% of Maryvale's need would have been coming from Hancock plantations. But significantly, this yellow area, about a quarter of their hardwood needs to go into the Maryvale should have been coming from these new crop of plantations that were planted down at where we are now. Now, around 2007, we learnt that the plantations nearby, hardwood bluegums plantations established in the mid-90s, were being bulldozed by Hancock because they weren't growing well. For some reason in this area the yield from the hardwoods was very poor, and so those areas were bulldozed. But around the same time, AP got in an agreement with Midway and Macquarie Bank to establish plantations to feed this new pulp mill expansion. 20,000 hectares was required, and we learnt basically by 2009 the amount of plantation that had been established wasn't 20,000, it was about 7,000 to 8,000 hectares, planted mainly by Macquarie and Midway in areas such as this. And then what happened was there was the collapse of the MIS, the managed investment schemes, and there was brakes put on all the plantation expansion. And so instead of a figure of 20,000 20,000 hectares of bluegums established in central Gippsland to feed the pulp mill expansion, it closed out at about 7,000 to 8,000 hectares, way under what the initial estimate was. And at the same time, around 2009, we had the bushfires, which knocked out something like 8,000 hectares of Hancock's hardwood in 1 or 2 afternoons, 1 or 2 days. So we were raising concerns back in the 2000s, late 2000s, that there was going to be a big supply crunch for Maryvale. And we now reached 2020, and this is what I've worked out. I'd say that they're still got access to native forests at 350,000 cubic metres under the Wood Pulp Act. They've the amount of wood coming from Hancock is reduced by about 100,000 cubic metres because of poor growth and bushfires. Now significantly, this area here is yellow, which was supposed to be 20%. This is the stuff that we're looking at now. That's been, I'd estimate down, it's down as low as 3%. And it could be a little bit higher, but it won't be, according to my estimates. And then you've got this area here, almost a third of their hardwood supply is from questionable sources. I can only put it down to that I'd say they're getting it from native forest. So I'd say that the amount of native forest entering Maryvale is about 600,000 cubic metres, and that's been elevated since this promise of the new pulp the pulp mill expansion back in 2005. So it's been elevated at that, and the new plantations that were supposed to take up that extra it hasn't eventuated. So we've got a major problem on our hands down here. Now at the same time, we've got an issue of the native forests have been absolutely hammered, particularly in the Central Highlands, and they've been impacted by fire. And so you've got an issue where the fires haven't reduced the logging in those areas. So those areas in the Central Highlands are coming under increasingly more pressure to be logged. Dan Andrews has got pressure from the green groups to get them out of native forest, which is clearly unsustainable. And so he's made a new pledge by 2030 that the Maryvale pulp mill will be totally reliant on plantations. Now I'm looking at this and just thinking, what a crazy idea. But anyway, and the state government has now stepped in and is planting out 50,000 hectares of new, well, they're not new plantation, they're actually, a lot of them are on Hancock land that was bluegum that Hancock have essentially walked away from. So the state government is now thinking they can grow bluegum on sites that even Hancock walked away from, only a few years ago. And even companies down here have walked away from and are now planting pine because for some reason pine grows really well down here, but the hardwood doesn't. So for Maryvale in a few years' time, there is going to be a shortage of wood. They're going to have to get it, hardwood that is. Pine's fine, but the hardwood is the real problem. And no one seems to be wanting to talk about it. And anyone, they've got all these groups pressuring the companies to go into plantations, but none of them are looking at growth rates or where the plantations are or how much the plantations are actually sustaining. There's also talk that Midway have been exporting via, they've floated on the stock exchange, so they're actually, there could have been a hardwood moved from these areas that were planted for Maryvale that have actually ended up being exported because the money's better. And the other issue is there's a heap of plantations in Western Victoria, and a lot of people have been saying that they should be used instead, which is an argument, but I think that a lot of those areas are under contract already, export contract, because the money's better. And the mill keeps saying, Maryvale keeps saying it's unsustainable to for them, unviable to import stuff from Western Victoria. I think economically for them it's got to be within 100 kilometres of Maryvale. So yeah, this is just a little update from the debacle unfolding in central Gippsland.